View of the parts and pieces. So this is a model of an atom, and we say it's a model of an atom because they're so small that we can't see them, and even with the most powerful microscope we can't even see it. So over the last few hundred years we've created this model, and the model has changed several times, and there's a new updated model, and we're not going to get into that, but this is the best model to help you understand. There's three parts of an atom, but there's really two major things to consider. First is the nucleus, and the nucleus is made up of the protons and the neutrons, and that's in the center of the atom. It makes up most of the weight, and we're going to get into the individual parts of it, but the core of the atom is about 99.99% of the mass. And then we have these electrons that are flying around on the outside, and they are what determines how reactive the atom is, and we'll get into that in a minute. So this is the model, and atoms make up everything in the universe, and depending on what type of atom it is, determines what the element or the compound is. So in the core there's the proton, and that's a positively charged particle. It's a positively charged particle. So if you think about a magnet, there's a positive end and a negative end. The same thing is true with an atom. The positive end of an atom is the proton. In the core of the atom, there's also a neutrally charged particle called the neutron, and the neutron is really a kind of a boring part of the atom. There's no charge in it, but it does create a little bit of mass. And there's the interesting thing about the neutrons is that the neutrons don't have to balance out with anything. Because they have a neutral charge, there can be more neutrons or less neutrons in an atom. For example, hydrogen doesn't have a neutron at all. And some atoms have extra neutrons, or less neutrons. So they're kind of interesting, and they're kind of boring at the same time. They have no charge. The next particle is really the exciting part about an atom, and that's the electron. They're super exciting because they have a negative charge, and they can be stripped off, or they can be added to the atom, and that's what just determines whether or not an atom is reactive with another atom. If there's extra electrons, then they give up electrons, but if they need electrons in an electron shell, they actually capture electrons from other atoms, and that's what really makes an atom reactive or not. So I would say that the electrons are the most exciting thing about atoms and chemistry. So the protons are at the core of the atom. They're in the nucleus. They're positively charged. You got to remember that. Proton means positive. Begins with the P, has a positive charge. So the number of protons determine what a substance is and contains half of the mass of the atom. Okay, so the other half is going to be the neutrons, with the electrons being almost no mass at all. About 1/1000th of the mass of one proton. Okay, so the nucleus is made up of two particles. Do you remember what they are? Yeah, they're the protons and the neutrons. And you're going to see that this is a little bit redundant. I'm going to go over and over and over so you guys can try and understand this a little bit. And I find that repetition works pretty well. Okay, so protons are positively charged particles in the nucleus. So in this model right here, the protons are which particle? The red or the blue or the gray? Yeah, they're the red particles with the positive on them. Protons are positive. Whoops, I just gave it to you. What charge does the proton carry? It's a positive charge. Neutrons, you remember what charge the neutrons have? Neutrons. Yeah, the neutrons, they're neutrally charged. They have no charge, and I told you that they're very boring. They're a very boring particle in the nucleus. There's the nucleus again. What particles are in the nucleus? You remember the protons and the neutrons. Protons are positive, neutrons are neutral. Remember that the neutrons don't have to balance out in the atom, but the protons and the electrons do, or they'll become unstable. Okay, so neutrons equal no charge. Neutrons, neutrally charged particles. Neutrally means no charge. If you're in a car and you have it in neutral, that means you're not engaged. It's not in any kind of gear. Okay, and in this model, can you remember which particle it is? There's a positive charge and there's a negative charge. And then the blue ones are the neutrally charged ones. So neutrons are the least exciting particle in the atom. They have no energy and don't affect the chemical reactivity of the atom. So that's why I say they're boring. So neutrons, no charge, just mass. Yeah, she looks pretty excited, doesn't she? That's because she's thinking about neutrons. And neutrons are what? They're neutrally charged and they're boring. Okay, the neutron. Which particle in this atom is the neutron? The neutron is a neutral or no charge. You can see that there is a charge here, a negative. What particle is that? You remember? It's the electron. What particle is the positive charge? Those are protons. What charge does the neutron have? It's a neutrally charged particle. Notice that there's no plus or minus sign on the particle at all. That's because it's neutral. It allows the atom to have more of them or less of them and still be in balance. So protons, positive charged particles in the nucleus. Which particle is it? Yeah, it's the red. The protons are positive. And there is a little arrow. What charge does the proton carry again? Positive. Neutrons. Remember what neutrons, the facts about neutrons? There's the neutron. Notice that it has no plus or minus sign on it. So that makes it neutral. What charge does the proton have again? It's positive. What charge? Positive. Protons equal positive charge. Neutron. What charge does the neutron have? Neutrally charged particles. There's no charge in a particle, right? That makes them boring. Maybe you're going to think that this is boring, this video, because I'm repeating over and over and over again. But the neutron has half of the mass of the atom, so it's pretty important. Okay, so there's three parts of the atom. There's the neutron with no charge, the proton with a positive charge, and the electron with a negative charge. Proton, positive, and half of the mass of the atom. It's also the particle that determines what the substance is. So a gold atom has a certain amount of protons, and that number determines that it's gold. When you change the number of protons in an atom, it changes the characteristics of that element. So a gold element has certain physical and chemical traits and characteristics. And it's because of the protons. So it's pretty exciting. The protons are pretty cool. They determine everything about the atom except for its reactivity. The neutron is just mass in the middle of the atom. Okay, it has no charge, but it has half of the mass. Again, in some cases, there are less neutrons than protons, and in that case they'll have less than half of the mass. But in general, the neutrons are equal to the protons in general. Now the electrons, again, they're super exciting. They're super light. They are 1/1000th of the mass of the other two. So if we had this really to scale, that gray dot would be just like a little pencil dot because it's about 1/1000th of the mass of one of the protons. And the electrons are negatively charged. They have no mass, but they are the exciting particle in the atom. They are what determines how reactive they are. So they're what causes the boom. They're what causes the rust. They're what causes the fizzle and the pop and the smoke and the flames. So they're pretty exciting. Neutron. We're back to that. Neutron. You remember what charge they are? They're neutral. They have no charge whatsoever. And they're at the core of the atom. And that core is called what? Yeah, it's called the nucleus. Nucleus. Notice that there's no plus sign or in this particle at all. No negative. So it's neutral. So, take out your piece of paper and answer the following questions. This is number 1. What two particles are in the nucleus of the atom? Well, the nucleus is in the core, and you can see from the diagram that protons and neutrons are in the nucleus. So protons and neutrons is the answer. What particles are in the electron shells? What particles are in the electron shells? Flying around on the outside. They're exciting part of the atom. They're part of the atom that determines whether an element is reactive or not. They're the boom, the pop, the fizzle. This is not a trick question. You're right, it's the electrons. The electrons are the exciting part. If I was going to dress up for Halloween as an atomic particle, I would be the electrons, because it's what causes everything in chemistry. All right, so which particle is positive? Which particle is positive? You remember? You remember what color it is? I don't know why this is, but they always show them a little bit smaller than the neutron. You can see this picture, it's a little bit smaller. Yeah, it's the proton, the red one. And then the diagram over here, you can see the proton has a positive charge. Which particle is the negative? Negative. Sometimes we get confused about this and we think, oh, the protons are positive, the neutrons might be negative because they begin with N. But it's not the neutrons. It's the electrons. Remember, the electrons are what causes the element to be reactive. And then, which particle is neutral? Which part is neutral? Well, if you look at the word neutron, it's got the same root to it. So, of course, the particle that is neutral is the neutron. So remember that atoms are small. They're super, super small. We almost can't even get a grasp on what that means. They're so small that the human brain really doesn't have any scale to think about that. Think about it. There's 1 billion atoms on the head of a pin that go across the head of a pin. So I don't even know if you know what 1 billion is, but I think if we stacked $100 bills on top of each other, 1 billion would be about a 4-foot stack, 4 by 4 by 4 stack on a pallet or something like that. It's a lot. There's a lot. So atoms are super, super small. They're made of 3 particles. The nucleus is made up of 2 parts, the protons and the neutrons, and then we have the electrons flying around on the outside. And that's it.